Hello, everyone, and welcome to Day 5 of the 2021 Virtual Water Leaders Summit, coming to you from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. My name is Dean Amhouse, and I'm the President and CEO of the Water Council. My apologies for the little bit of late delay. We had some technical difficulties that we were scrambling. We were able to get them corrected. So my apologies for a little bit behind schedule. Yesterday's session was packed with a great deal of information and insights. We started the session off with announcing that Dr. Mo Mukupi from Stonehouse Water Technologies, he's their president and CTO, was the recipient of our 2021 Water Warrior Award for his start of what he calls Mo's Minion Program, which allows students from surrounding high schools to come to the Global Water Center to work on water quality projects. This program aims to train high school students who are historically underrepresented in water science and engineering to conduct innovative drinking water treatment research. The program began with Sarah Gonzalez Rothi yesterday from the White House Office of Council Environmental Quality. She outlined her role in helping to shape water policy in President Biden's administration. And she described how CEQ serves as the behind-the-scenes linchpin in connecting all of the federal agencies with respect to environmental issues. She stated that they are doing their job well when the administrative procedures flow smoothly and policies advance forward. Later in the session, we got a few terrific quotes from the discussion between the responder panelists. Claudia Toussaint from Xylem said, "Everyone will experience climate change through water." Emilia Tenuta from Ecolab stated that when it comes to water policy, we need to be more proactive and less reactive. And our moderator, Charles Fishman, closed things out by saying, we need to stop applying 19th century technology in the 21st century world. For a full recap of last week's summit, please read my blog on our website at the Water Council to be able to get a sense of everything that was going on. Helping to make this summit possible is through our generous support of our presenting sponsors, A.O. Smith and Baird. I mentioned earlier the Water Warrior Award, which was supported by Ecolab. Our water leaders include Badger Meter, Evoqua, Fund for Lake Michigan, MMSD's Milorganite, Molson Coors, Sloan, Watts Water, Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation, and Xylem. We greatly appreciate all of their terrific support to be able to bring this summit to you. Before we get into the program, I will ask Marissa from SignalWire to provide a few housekeeping comments on using today's platform.
Good morning. If you have any technical difficulties at all during the day, please click on the question mark in the top right of your screen. You can talk to any of our support team members and they can help you through things. At the bottom right-hand corner, you'll see a pink and blue bubble. That is your chat. If you click on that, it'll open the chat box. Please add any questions, any comments, anything that you would like to add to the conversation today there. Thank you.
Thank you, Marissa. As we've done with each of our sessions for the summit, we have started our program off with one of our brew pitches from last February. We started a revamped brew program we call Brew 2.0, which is targeted as a post-accelerator. We were very pleased to have 12 remarkable companies from the United States, Canada, and Chile participate in that 2-week program in February. At the close of that program, we provided them the opportunity to make pitches. And for you to be able to now see those 12 pitches, today we are going to be showing you the one from Copperstone. At the end of this program, we'll be showing you another one from Bloom Optics. So with that, I will turn it over to Nick to start the Copperstone
video.
Hello,
I'm Craig Mills, CEO of Copperstone Technologies in Edmonton, Canada. We help clients manage risks and liabilities associated with collecting data in hazardous environments. What's common to these situations is water. Water creates a unique challenge in human safety as well as equipment access, because it's difficult to traffic in and poses a danger to people involved. So what Copperstone has done is built a robot specialized in trafficking between water-based environments and hard ground. Our robot is amphibious. It can drive through water like a boat, it can crawl across a beach, and it can drive across hard ground, much like a wheeled robot could. The robot then is capable of doing different jobs depending on the type of industry we're working in. We actually built a family of robots called Helix. The one on the left here is deceivingly large. It's the size of a small car. And it's that big because what we do in the mining industry is heavy geotechnical work and need to bring out heavy payloads or sampling tools out to a mine site. We also built smaller robots, more for water-based sampling and survey work as well. We work with a number of the world's largest mining companies. They typically have waste storage facilities, which are challenging to access, but require routine monitoring and measurements. So we work with these companies, and as a startup, we are revenue positive, and we have some ambitious goals to grow, even within this industry segment. A good example of the type of work we do is with Brazilian mining company Vale. They had a failure at a tailings facility about 2 years ago, which resulted in several hundred deaths and tens of billions of dollars worth of fines and loss of value to the company. And so we work with Vale now to help understand and manage their risks around their tailings ponds, places where people aren't even allowed to go. So traditional equipment has been used in the past and currently, of course. Large barges are expensive to operate, require people in hazardous locations. Boats really aren't capable of trafficking in some of the locations that we enter. So there's lots of interest in robotics, but there's really no specialized robot capable of trafficking in all situations, hard ground, muddy, tailings type environments, snow, water, and aerial drones just aren't capable of carrying heavy payloads. So our amphibious robot does, and we offer it to clients as easily as possible, and we do that through what we call a robot as a service business. So clients don't have the capital outlay, but they can access data based on simple project fees or day rates. And so really, for us, profitability is driven by utilization of the robot. We scale as a company by adding more and more autonomy to the robots, which makes it easier for us to deploy. And we also build a very interesting data set across these hazardous locations of really what's happening there for our clients. We have a fabulous team, robotics engineers. Myself, I'm a serial entrepreneur. I've been involved in a number of technology companies, and we're building out a strong services team to work with clients. So really what we're looking for is we're setting up for a seed round of capital with bootstrap to date, but raising money in the spring. We're always looking for pilot customers, partnerships, both on the R&D side for data analysis and autonomy, as well as sensor manufacturers, and then always looking for corporate innovation partners willing to give us a shot and work with us. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Craig, for your pitch, and want to wish the company all the success as they move forward. So we're going to start the main program. This is going to be the topic, Lessons from Texas. What did we learn from the situation several months ago with a ice storm and snowstorm that happened in Texas, the electrical grid, but also impact on the water utilities as well. We had to record this session in advance to be able to get all the parties to be together. So we're going to run the video. There will be a few seconds probably at the beginning that may be the initial, sort of pulling everybody together. But shortly as that proceeds forward, you'll get into the main program. I want to remind everybody that you can ask questions down in the bottom right-hand corner. And Carol Haddock will be able to join us live, so she'll be able to answer your questions after the program, the taped program. So let's get started and hear from Charles as he gets going with Carol and Steve.
You want to say? you know, I'll give you a chance at the end, but at any point you could say, hang on 1 second, Charles, I want to make a point about this, or I want to follow up on what Steve said, or I just remembered something I wanted to say. It's just like being on stage, okay?
Okay.
All right, here we go. 3, 2, 1. Welcome to the Water Leaders Summit in 2021, the summer of 2021. We are delighted and honored to have two really interesting and also very distinguished and experienced members of the water world with us this morning. We have Carol Haddock, who is the Director of Houston Public Works, a job in which she runs water, wastewater, and a few other things, including, I think, permitting. We're going to talk about the water part today. And Carol has spent almost her entire career working in public works for the city of Houston. And we're here to talk with Carol and Steve Clouse. Steve Clouse is the Senior Vice President and COO of SAWS, as they like to be called, the San Antonio Water System. And they're going to tell us the story of this incredible week, which really expanded into 2 weeks, of trying to manage water in 2 Texas cities, Houston and San Antonio, through what may have been the worst week in the world of modern water management anywhere in the United States, perhaps setting aside Katrina. That's sort of a category all its own. But the winter storm that hit Texas this past February was a natural and public disaster on many scales. Of electricity, which caused the disaster, got all the attention, but water, which was in some ways a victim of the electricity disaster itself, caused a series of cascading problems all across Texas, or in fact, the lack of water. Carol Haddock in Houston went into that week, she said, Houston always has a certain amount of road clearing chemical. They have 16,000 road miles, lane miles of road in Houston, and they have ice clearing chemicals for 800 miles. They keep 5%, just enough to clear their frozen bridges 3 times a winter, because that's all they need. That's what the people in Houston were up against and what Carol Haddock and her people were up against. Steve, I want to just point out one thing about Steve Clouse, because he has a really interesting honorific in the world of water. He has a wastewater treatment plant named after him. Even though he's still in an operational role, Steve Clouse retired, or tried to retire, a couple of years ago, and they renamed the pioneering, it's really a water recycling plant in San Antonio. It was called the Dos Rios Wastewater Treatment Plant. They named it the Stephen P. Clouse Wastewater Treatment Plant. And then, having given him a wastewater treatment plant, they asked him to come back and run the water system. Most of us can only dream of having a wastewater treatment plant named after ourselves. So, Carol and Steve, thanks for joining us. I want you each to start not with the narrative of the week. We're going to get to that in a minute. You each told me an incredibly harrowing story from one point in the week, which kind of puts what this was like into sharp relief. Steve, let's start with you and the phone call you had to make on Tuesday morning. I'm sorry, I didn't set the scene. This, forgive me, this event started really the night of Valentine's Day, February 14th. On Friday, February 12th, everybody across Texas, ordinary people, public officials, elected officials, folks like Steve and Carol, were told what was coming. It was going to be super cold. Some places were going to get ice. Some places were going to get snow, but super cold in the sense of below freezing for long periods of time, days on end. And the cold was not going to let up. Monday morning dawned. In San Antonio, it was 9 degrees In Houston, on Monday morning by noon, 1 million people in the city did not have power. Monday was the day that blackouts across the state began. Tuesday, the sun rose to 13 degrees in Houston. I think one of the coldest temperatures ever recorded in Houston. San Antonio announced on Tuesday morning that they were not turning the water off. If you had low pressure, it was because there were pipes in people's homes or pipes in the system breaking. By Wednesday, the power situation and the cold situation was such that both Carol and Steve and their utilities issued boil water orders. As somebody in the media put it in one of those cities, if you had water coming out of your tap at that point and you wanted to use it, boil it. Of course, people were being advised to boil water, but they didn't have any electricity. That's why they needed to boil the water in the first place. So raising the question, what would you actually use to boil your water? On Thursday, the Texas Electric Reliability Council, the most ironically named public institution of the year, began to roll back the rolling blackouts. On Thursday, power began to be restored. And by Friday, folks in the position of running these cities, including Steve and Carol, were scrambling to try and bring their systems back because at least they had power. So this started Sunday night on Valentine's Day. The crisis period really lasted until the following Saturday, the 20th. Okay, I'm sorry. Steve, go ahead. Tell us the story of the phone call you had to make on Tuesday morning, February 16th.
Sure, Charles, and thanks for having me. I'm really, really glad to be here. So, of course, as you mentioned, the rolling blackout started on Monday, and we planned for everything we could reasonably plan for to be prepared for those colder temperatures that we knew were coming. We had adequate warning that we were going to have to deal with some really extreme situations, compared to our normal weather. And we had taken what we thought were all the prudent and reasonable steps to prepare. But what we didn't plan for were rolling blackouts. We were completely unprepared for it coming up as quickly as it did, that we were going to move into a rolling blackout situation, and then for it escalating. What was an initial demand by ERCOT quickly doubled and even tripled on the amount of power that San Antonio as a whole had to find to cut back on.
To give back, right?
To not use.
They were cutting power. They were tripling what they were turning off.
Right. So in San Antonio, we're a system that is on groundwater, and our system has grown over time to where we have pumping stations that are pulling water out of the ground and distributing really all over San Antonio. We have about 80 different pumping stations. A lot of cities have a lake or one big source of supply that is how they get water into town, and then they just push it out to the community. Ours is a much more what we call spoken hub system. You drill a well, you build a pump station, and then the neighborhood grows around it. So when the requirements to cut back on power kept escalating every time that CPS, our local electric utility, needed to find a part of town that they could do their rotating brownouts to, it inevitably involved taking out our pump stations. You couldn't separate the two. So we worked very hard with the electrical folks to try to minimize the time that a pump station was down so that we could get back to it from a power perspective before the tank went dry. And that was a losing battle. We could tell it just got worse and worse through Monday. Monday night was especially bad as far as the amount of time that those stations had to stay offline. And by Tuesday morning, it was clear to me that we had lost the battle to try to maintain water pressure in San Antonio. Just as you said, people were doing everything. They were on rotating brownouts, so they didn't have a lot of houses didn't have heat. And so I was extremely concerned. Not only the fact that we had lost pressure for these houses, but those folks are going to be doing everything possible to try to stay warm, including burning stuff. So fire was an enormous concern, and we did have several large fires through that event. So on Tuesday morning at about 5:45 in the morning, I just realized I had to directly call the head of our fire department, Chief Hood here in San Antonio. And I told him, Chief Hood, it doesn't matter what part of town you're going to anymore. You have to assume that we don't have pressure and that you're going to have to take tanker trucks to every fire that you face. You cannot depend on fire hydrants anymore.
The fire hydrants may not have any water in them when you get there.
That's correct.
And what was that? I mean, that's, most people will appreciate, most cities in the United States started out having water precisely to fight fires. What was it like? I'm chuckling, but I shouldn't be chuckling. What was it like to call the fire chief at 5:45 in the morning and say, Chief, the one thing we can't give you is water? And what was his what was it like, and what was his reaction?
Well, first I called my boss, and I told my boss first that I was going to have to make that call for obvious reasons.
A good idea.
Exactly. So both of them, I'd have to say, Chief Hood understood what was going on. He saw the reports in the media. He knew that we were struggling to keep water throughout the rest of the city. Nonetheless, we were hamstrung in that with the loss of power, we lost our pressure devices across San Antonio. So we knew there were parts of town where we indeed didn't have water pressure, but on other parts of town where we believed we still had water pressure, we couldn't see it. So I couldn't describe for him where he was safe or where he was not safe with water pressure. We hadn't lost the whole system at that part. There are a couple of parts of town, like around our medical complex, that we never lost power and we never lost water. We were able to protect the medical complex. Thank goodness for that. But we couldn't tell you what the pressure was in the medical complex. So we just had to assume everything was out.
Okay, hold on one second. I want to underscore one thing. But what did the fire chief say to you? Was he expecting your call? Was he surprised? Was he matter of fact?
I think he was very matter of fact. He was not surprised by that call. He understood that, you know, we can't operate without power. And so he understood there was a cause and effect relationship here. And as long as those brownouts were continuing, we were going to be in that situation. You portrayed it as a victim. I don't want to think of us as a victim. We were doing everything we could to try to manage around it. But in San Antonio, we do not have generators backing up our large pumping station. Okay. That's the next part of the story.
That's the next part. Hold on right there. So I just want to underscore two things. In the early days of this crisis, the crisis was already so bad that the water department called the fire department and said, we can't guarantee you water. When you roll, take the water you're going to need to fight the fire. And by the way, we have a whole system of remote sensing devices that tell us what the pressure in our system is. And it's so cold and there is so little reliable electricity that those sensing devices aren't working. There may be places we have water and don't know it because the sensing devices aren't reporting back. Okay, Steve, hold on. Now, and you sort of started telling the story of San Antonio, which is great. Carol Haddock, take us. You can do what Steve did if you want, which is set the scene a little bit. But you had as harrowing a week as anybody, and then you had a moment. You actually said to me, you talked to me for 35 minutes, and then you said, I haven't told you the scariest part yet. So tell us what the scariest part was after the really scary part.
Well, Charles, thank you. First off, thank you for having both Steve and I here today. It is a pleasure to jointly tell the stories that we experienced over that week. I wish that we weren't on this panel telling these stories. I wish that we had been spared, but since we were, I always take the opportunity to brag on the team that surrounds me here at Houston Public Works. And just as Steve said, we weren't victims. We fought a battle that week, but it was certainly with a well-informed and well-trained and a capable team. But I do want to just add on one thing to what Steve said. We had our pressure sensors out throughout our system as well, and found out during this event that our pressure sensors were not rated for the temperatures that they were in. And so we couldn't actually trust any of the readings, that even if we were getting readings, we couldn't trust that those readings were good. We would get a reading that would tell us that it was 15 PSI, and we'd send somebody out in the field to check it and it was 37. And, or, you know, opposite, we would get a 40 PSI reading and we'd send somebody to the field and it was 12. You know, and so so it was not even just the ability to communicate. In some cases, the sensors and the data that we were getting was bad because the equipment was not rated.
Right, and that's when you think about being ready for a storm like this. Maybe today you would ask those questions, but the storm came on February 14th. On February 10th, no one would have had on the list of the top 20 things to do, make sure the remote pressure sensors are rated below 15 degrees, right?
No,
right.
no,
So,
it wouldn't have been on our list. Wouldn't have been on our list at all.
There are some lessons that you can only learn by having the crisis. Okay, so tell us
we'll get back to the story.
Moment.
So we'll get back to this story. So we're going through our week, and we had, similar to San Antonio, you know, we had our pressure challenges. We issued our boil water notice on Wednesday morning. We spent the day Wednesday working to get, our plants never went fully offline. We had one plant that had a couple hours that were offline. We have mostly surface water treatment in the city of Houston. We're more than 80% surface water, but we have distributed wells throughout the system. And so we had a lot of wells that went down in our system because they were in the rotating, and our generators didn't start because they were diesel generators, and diesel doesn't start at 8, 10, 12 degrees. And so we get all this back up, and we get all this running, and we get the system pressured back up. We actually managed to get ourselves citywide system repressurized in about one day, which was amazing in and of itself. We go through getting it up stable citywide above 50 PSI.
And that's actually Friday afternoon, Saturday.
Friday afternoon, Saturday morning. So Saturday morning, we pull our regulatory samples, and we're waiting our 24 hours to make sure that we don't have any bacteria positive in the system. And Saturday afternoon, my staff comes in and they're like, all right, Carol, we're going to get the results back, and we're going to come out of the boil water notice on Sunday afternoon, assuming everything goes well. And we are going to run out of chlorine on Tuesday. And I'm like, what? And they're like, well, we only keep 5 to 7 days on site. And the company that provides the chlorine for us is we call them a repackager. They bring in chlorine on large tanker rail cars, and they use a facility here on the ship channel to take that chlorine, repackage it into smaller vehicles and tanks, and then bring it out to our facilities that we use. And we are a very chlorine-rich area in Houston. We produce chlorine, we repackage chlorine. We are the ship channel industries. And then all of a sudden we have this moment where we may not be able to access that chlorine because the repackaging facility has had damage from the storm. They've had pipes break from the freeze. Their facility is physically down. And they were, by Sunday, we're finally back in good weather. And so they are out there very deliberately working as quickly as they can. And they tell us on Monday morning, we believe we're going to have everything repaired and kick everything back on. And if that's the case, we should be able to make deliveries by Tuesday morning. Well, Tuesday morning was our first facility that was going to run out of disinfectant. And so we were cutting it very, very close. And it didn't just impact us. It impacted, many other cities around us. This area provides chlorine throughout the state. Chlorine you can't take across state lines, which everybody in the industry knows that.
You discovered that. I thought that was really interesting.
But that was not something that I knew. And so it was, this search for
chlorine. You couldn't
chlorine.
call somebody in Arkansas or Oklahoma or Florida and say, we need 3 tank trucks of chlorine.
Correct. We could not do that because they could not bring it across the state lines and deliver it to us. Now we did have the Army working with us, trying to locate it and get it to us, and everything worked in our favor. They fired that thing up on Monday morning, and they started repackaging, and we were all able to sleep. But I'll tell you, through the entire week, that was the single moment where I thought, okay, we've made it through all this, and now I've got to go tell the mayor that we may have to go back into a boil water. Now we'd be able to fight fires, people would have water at their houses and all those things, but that was the one that it was like, wow, never in a million years would I have thought this was the critical. And there's a reason we don't have more chlorine than that on site. It has to do with safety. It has to do, I mean, really that's a very large amount to have on site for the size plants that we have. And for safety reasons, you can't have more than that on site.
Right,
But
you
it
don't want to
certainly
stockpile, right?
Yeah, so it certainly becomes a critical piece in that recovery effort.
Okay, so now, Carol, let's go back and tell us the highlights and lowlights of the week from your perspective. I just wanted to get those two. Most people listening with us today will never have had to make a call like Steve had to make. We're advising the fire department there is no water, and I don't think most folks will have lived through a week like you're about to describe, and then had someone walk up and say there's no chlorine. Why don't you see if you can get some somewhere else? I was, before you tell the week, how did the Army come to be helping you? Who said let's go? I would not, the Army is not the people I would think would provide chlorine.
Well, so, and just real quick, whenever you're in a situation like that and FEMA comes in to be part of your response team, they'll reach into every federal agency that there is out there to see if they can help you on that. We also here locally have a very active partnership with all of our local military. And so we don't have many bases in Houston, but we have a lot of connection to and partnerships with the military. We have Coast Guard locally.
Right, and those folks are, the military is a user of chlorine, so people pick up the phone when the Army calls.
Well, and so we were reaching with them to see if they had any available at their facilities that could be redirected to us, and so things of that nature. So if we start back at the beginning of this event, when we started watching it, as you said, I have streets and drainage in addition to the water and wastewater system. So we were really looking at this being a street event. And many of you saw the horrific crashes that happened up in the Dallas-Fort Worth area leading into this event. The bridges that froze over, the people that lost their lives. And so coming into this, you saw that heightened sensitivity to the fact that we were going to have road conditions that you don't see on the Gulf Coast going into that weekend. And so we had brought in a skeleton crew. We couldn't bring in the full crew that we would normally bring for a storm response because of COVID. We still had to have COVID protocols. We had to have people spaced out. We had people in masks, people, making sure we were taking care of them. But we brought in our street and our bridge crews, and we were treating streets and we were treating bridges. And those were the people, that's what they were trained for. That's who was on site. Sunday night, we started having the first rolling blackouts. We were expecting that. But Sunday night into Monday morning, the mayor got a phone call that this was going to be more than rolling. And if they were rolling, they were going to be extended rolling. And so that Monday morning, Sunday night, Monday morning, we had our first power outage that impacted one of our major treatment facilities. The power was only out for a couple hours, and we are required by state law, and we do have backup generation on all of our treatment facilities and our major redistribution facilities. But we were unable to transfer our load over to that generator through a series of things. One, we had to swap some switches around internally, and by the time we got everything relined up, the grid had come back on. But in that 2 hours, we had basins freeze over. Literally, they had frozen across the top. We had treatment facilities, very large treatment facilities frozen over.
The water in these huge tanks literally froze.
Froze across the top. We've got photos of that. in the sedimentation basins, we have rakes that keep the sediment moving. Well, because they hadn't been moving, they couldn't start back up because there was just too much friction to overcome to be able to do that. So we were already really hurting by Monday at noon. Monday afternoon, we had one of our wells that was very significant on the west side of town that we were not getting a generator successfully on, and thought we were going to lose the system on Monday afternoon. Pull that back, guys are out. I mean, we're having a hard time getting people on roads, much less to the facility they need to be at to do the things they need to do. We're not used to having ice.
Right. That's what you said to me. You said one of the big challenges at the start of the week was we were prepared, but we weren't prepared to not be able to get to the things that needed our attention.
And that it was absolutely correct. I mean, we had electricians, they were ready to go. We just physically couldn't get them there. I mean, so we ended up loading down a bunch of dump trucks and using heavy to overcome ice and, you know, getting people to the facilities that they needed to get to.
You also said, let me just pause you one more minute. You also talked about equipment for the folks going out into the cold, boots, gloves. What was that like?
Yeah, so we do not have winter weather equipment. I mean, our gloves are to protect your hands from what you're messing with, not to keep them warm. Our boots are not at all for keeping people's feet warm. Here in Houston, I've lived in Houston and I've also lived in Washington, D.C. I had a completely different set of clothes for winter in D.C. than I had in Houston. And D.C. winters are nothing compared to what you see up north. And so our crews, I mean, they literally were out there working completely ill prepared physically for the cold that they were enduring while they were out there working, trying to use tools, you know,
Right.
wrenches.
Anybody who's been outside in 8 or 10 degrees, even just walking the dog, your fingers don't work after 10 minutes. And these are people.
We didn't even talk about the fact that we had rain the majority of Saturday and Sunday before we went into the freeze, before it finally cleared up and went into the freeze. So we actually had wet roads that were freezing and wet equipment that was freezing. So
Right.
it wasn't a dry freeze, it was a wet freeze.
And at what point would you say you essentially lost the system? Was the power out? The backup generators weren't working? When did that happen? And I think at some point somebody called you all and said, we're turning the power off.
Well, CenterPoint, and for us, CenterPoint is our transmission entity that takes energy from the grid and delivers it to our local customers. And CenterPoint had several representatives with us at the Emergency Operations Center throughout the duration of the storm. And they were in constant communication with us. We're getting this much energy back. Nope, we're being asked to shed this much. And they were working with us on specific areas. You know, can we keep power to this? Can we take power away from this area? And so throughout the storm, we had very, very good communication and coordination with CenterPoint on making that happen. But it was really Tuesday afternoon that we were recognizing that we were really not going to be able to hold on unless some things really went our way overnight, Tuesday night, Wednesday morning. When I went to bed Tuesday night, and I tell people I went to bed every night, I got 6 hours of sleep because I knew my job was to be clear-headed and to be able to communicate clearly on TV. And so I had to have that rest. But when I went to bed Tuesday night, I had told the mayor that if we don't have a few things go our way, that Wednesday morning I was going to be calling him and telling him we were issuing a boil water notice. And he told me at that point that I didn't actually have his authority to lose the system. And so that I needed to make sure that everybody did what they could overnight. And he was joking, but he was also serious. And the reason he was serious is you can't tell people who don't have power that they have to boil their water. I mean, just the impact to people in their homes of you don't have power and now we're telling you that your water's not safe if you have water. Right. And so Tuesday night we went overnight and it was clear that the couple of Hail Marys that we were trying weren't going to work. And so Wednesday morning was when we issued our boil water notice. I know San Antonio's, yours was a little earlier than ours, but about the same time. And that was when we really turned to how do we get out of this? And how do we make sure that we're taking care of our employees and our assets and everything along the way as we get through this? We had most of our infrastructure was actually not physically damaged. We had pipes that broke, particularly at plants that came out of the ground and went into things, but most of our pipes underground didn't break. The majority of the problems we had in the Houston area were actually inside private buildings. And so as we began to thaw out and pipes began to thaw out, that's where we began to experience the death by 1,000 cuts.
Okay,
Where,
hold on right there. Hold on right there. Death by 1,000 cuts. Let's let Steve tell that same Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday period from San Antonio's perspective, and then we'll talk about how you dig out. Steve,
Okay.
I remember you saying to me that your trucks didn't have chains and that your guys solved the glove problem in a really interesting way. So take us through the same couple of days that Carol just related.
Okay, and I think our situation was very similar to what Houston had on so many fronts. Probably the difference being we're a groundwater-based city, as I mentioned previously. In hard freezes in the past, to avoid having difficulty getting to our stations in the part of the county that are prone to icy conditions, we actually stationed people at every one of our stations. We told them, get ready, go live in your truck. You'll probably be there for a couple of days. Put a porta potty there, put a bunch of food in their truck, made sure they had lots of fuel. That way they could have a place to stay warm. That's the level of problem that we were anticipating. So, but we have 9 different water supplies that we can bring into San Antonio outside of our primary water source, which is the Edwards Aquifer. And so the very first thing that started happening on early Monday morning, I guessed it right, and I live in the northern part of town. I told my wife, I'm going to go into work and I'll probably stay there for the duration of this freeze just to make sure there's not a major problem. Only took 1 pair of clothes with me. That was not a good decision on my part because it wound up being a lot longer than I had anticipated staying there. So I was there in the office when we started getting calls, back to back calls from every one of our external water supplies, other than the Edwards Aquifer, calling us to say, we're freezing up, we're going offline, sort of good luck, you guys. And that wasn't a problem for us. It forced a major shift in how we were providing water in San Antonio. We had to turn off all those external supplies and then become fully redundant through the use of our Edwards Aquifer supplies, turn on a bunch of pump stations, if you will, that we hadn't planned on running. We were just going to stay in a normal operating mode. So that was the first indicator for me that this was going to be a lot dicier than we had realized. If all those externals are dropping off, how are we going to stay on? We never had a problem at any of our pump stations that we couldn't manage that as long as we had power. I think every one of our pump stations would have survived and been able to continue to operate through the event if power would have stayed on. But much like Carol, when we lost a pumping station, all the pipe that are above ground, from the wellhead over to the pump that pushes it out into the community, those pipes froze very quickly. So we wound up in this back and forth with our operators, very similar to what Carol was going through. We would lose power at a pump station. So we tell them, okay, well, come on in, we can use you somewhere else. If you can make it back into your workstation, we'll have you go to the next point. And then power would come back on. So we interrupt them while they're driving in and say, no, turn around and go back to that station and start it up real quickly. So they would do just exactly what we asked them to do. And when they got there, they would call back in an hour later and say, I've got power right now, but I think the station is frozen. I can't get any water to move through these pipes. So we just were in a constantly devolving situation of losing station after station after station. At the same time, the number of brownouts were going up and up and up. So late Monday, the main office where I was working out of, we were on porta potties because we didn't have water. and we were bringing in bottled water to operate the water system. It just seemed like such an unusual situation. Tuesday was the worst. On Tuesday, we were working with the electrical company, and they have a large coal-fired plant that operates in a section of the southern part of our town. And they called and said, your water pressure to our coal plant has dropped off. And if you don't bring water pressure back up to the coal plant, we're going to have to shut this power plant down. And at the time, that conversation was, and if we lose this power plant, the whole grid could be in trouble. The electrical grid could suffer as a result of that. And so that really was the defining moment to me of the nexus between water and energy, that if we couldn't keep water going, they couldn't keep power going, and vice versa.
You couldn't get them the water because
at that, I knew I could really see the trouble that we're in. So we kept going out to check people that were saying they had no water pressure, and we'd go to the fire hydrant right next to their house, and it was great. So what we realized is just like Carol said, the community was freezing. All these older homes that are on pier and beam foundations, I think almost every one of those froze. Underneath the house, the pipes were freezing. They would call us and say, we have no pressure. And then we'd wind up having to prove them otherwise. Or we had stations that we knew were flat out and we knew we didn't have pressure. So by Wednesday at about 1 o'clock, the city was calling an emergency city council meeting to talk about all the problems the city was having as a whole. And that's when we announced that we were going to have to do a boil water notice. We just didn't know anymore who had pressure and who did not. So we just decided to play it safe and issue the boil notice. Everyone immediately barks back at you, but how are we supposed to boil the water? Just like you said. So we got through that. And then Thursday, of course, we started getting the rolling brownout stopped. So very quickly, we started going out to really assess the damage that had occurred to our stations. Those pumping stations that froze, you could physically look at them and see pipes that were broken and separated.
These are big pipes.
Big pipes. So, but what we were fortunate in the long run, we assumed those pipes were broken, but in a lot of cases, the freeze had just pushed the pipes apart, so that all we had to do was to get the ice out of it, put all the couplings back together, tighten them all up, and we were able to get most of them, not all of them, but most of them cobbled back to where we could at least get one well running and one what we call a high service pump that goes out into the community. So we were able to, over the period from Thursday until Saturday, that's how long it took us to restore pressure in the system across the whole system, go through testing of that water to make sure that we didn't have any disinfection problems, and then lift the boil notices. And so really it was Saturday evening when we were back on track, and it was a matter of then just fixing all the problems and the damage that had occurred and sending our guys home. The fact that our guys were able to work through that entire period, and many of them worked much more than 24-hour shifts out there in the weather, we didn't have a single lost time injury during that entire event. With all of the things that we put them through, all the hazards they were working with, I think that's the greatest success story we could have ever had, is that we didn't have a lost time injury along the way.
That's very, very impressive. Carol, you look like you want to jump in and say something. Go ahead, but keep it quick.
No, I was just going to say, I can't, I just like Steve, I can't brag enough about the performance of the employees of this team who did exactly that and did it safely.
You told me people stepped up. Both of you said people said, I answer the phone. Give me something to do. No one wants to talk about their bill today.
So one of the things that I do want to brag on, in addition to everybody who normally helped with the billing side of it, going out and helping people figure out how to turn off the water at their house, we actually did a couple quick videos for our police department and all the officers who were out patrolling. When they saw water coming out of someone's house, they were knocking on doors. They were helping people turn off the water at their meter. And so we actually used the police and fire department to help with that.
You did videos in the middle of the crisis to teach police officers who came upon homes where the pipes were broken and they needed to turn the valve off at the street. They needed to turn the main valve off. You did videos to teach police officers how to do that, and then they went and did it.
Well, I didn't, but my team
No,
did.
right.
Absolutely.
I assume you did actually every single thing, Carol. That's pretty impressive. And were the police officers happy to have that that kind of video instruction?
Oh, so our police force really wants to help. And so to be able to give them a tool to actually go out and help people in the crisis they were in at the moment was a great tool for them. It was an incredible ability. We also had the media that was willing to help record these videos on how to find your main valve and turn it off. And if you don't have one at your house, to go to the meter box and turn one off.
Right. So right for people who could get it. I'm beginning to worry about time, because just because you guys are great storytellers and have an important story doesn't mean we have unlimited time. One really important lesson that's a little bit below the radar screen, but that you have both alluded to, is it would really be valuable for all water customers everywhere in the country to know how to shut the water off to their house right this minute, only because I asked, and I'm the kind of guy who wants to know. I know right where the main shutoff valve is in my house, in the basement, in the laundry room, but an education program saying to people, you really do need to know where the shutoff valve is in your house, and tie a pink ribbon around it or tie a yellow ribbon around it, so when you need to find it, you could find it. That would be hugely valuable. The other thing, again, just a quick point, and then we're going to get to a big question. Both of you said that in Texas, your above ground pumping facilities did not have buildings around them. And one of you told me they used to. I confess I can't remember which city used to. And that just having small structures around that equipment would have turned out to be really valuable. And so as people think about their, people listening today to you all, think about their own equipment. We've had the no gloves, no chains, no boots, pressure sensors that don't work below a certain temperature, equipment out in the open because there's never been a freeze that would require it. Those are the kinds of things you guys obviously have on a list somewhere now. Is that fair? Will you be building buildings around those facilities now that this has happened?
I would say we'll evaluate it. But I also have to say that the things on our list are probably the things that the people coming to your conference have had on their list for decades. I would challenge them to say, okay, what would Houston have that for us, running after a hurricane in 98-degree weather with 90% humidity for 3 weeks on end off the grid is normal. But what's going to be happening, in your part of the country that you may not have planned for on the heat side? Because the reason our buildings.
Hold on. I like that. Steve, you were going to say something about the buildings?
Well, the buildings are just one of the things that we've identified in the latter part of the storm. I believe it was Thursday. My boss came to me and said, I want an independent third-party review of how you guys have done, and I'm going to start that right now. And of course, that was a hard thing to hear at the time. We were not in full recovery at that point.
Could you wait until we have finished failing?
But in hindsight, I think it was the right thing to do. And then the mayor in San Antonio appointed another committee to put together a list of recommendations on how we did and what we should have done differently. We've compiled those two reports now, and we have a list of 73 things that we report out to our board every month. Here's where we're at with every one of these items, so that we are as prepared as we can be should we go through this type of a weather extreme again.
Okay, hold on one second, Steve. Let me ask a quick question. Don't give me the full report, but are the 73 things about how to be ready for another winter storm, or are the 73 things about this was an unexpected crisis? Here's a list of things that will help us in this kind of crisis or a related crisis as well. And that's a really good point, Charles, because
this was just the winter storm. There will be other things that we can't even imagine today that could potentially take us down. So it clearly addresses the winter storm, but it is broader than that. And a lot of the recommendations, I have to say, are communication and training for things that we can do to be prepared. So we are working extensively with the local electric utility to be better coordinated if they are into another rolling brownout situation, how we communicate with folks. It was difficult to communicate, but what happened is if you gave them an answer of, I don't know when the power is coming back on, that's seen as not communicating well. So we have to have better messages that we can share with the community on what we know and how long it'll be before we expect to have additional information. So I would say probably 40% of the report is just communication improvements to get to every single person in San Antonio and to get within our political leadership and all those other bedroom cities that have their own leadership groups on what we know and what we can anticipate coming forward. And then the rest of the report is really how are we going to harden our systems in such a way that we'll be better prepared for the next weather extreme, not just a freeze.
Okay, Carol, you alluded to the same thing, that one of the central lessons is to have walked through all of the electric. The electric power problem was the core of this. If you hadn't lost electricity, we probably wouldn't. You guys wouldn't have joined us this summer for the summit. Carol, tell me how you're working on that conversation with the electric utility and what that's like.
So we have been in, I mean, even during the event and before the event, we were in constant communication with CenterPoint, our local provider. And one of the things that we have done since then is we have actually started exploring with them. With the recent legislative changes, they now have the ability to have emergency generation, which they've never had that before. And so we're looking at the possibilities of actually having emergency generation co-located on some of our facilities, where during an emergency, not only can they provide backup energy for us, but they can actually provide backup energy for larger areas of the city. But those questions become how much, what is the true emergency? Is a hot summer day considered an emergency, or is it, so it does. There are a lot of questions that have to be answered. There's a lot of policy questions that have to be answered. The other thing is that the scale backs and the load shedding plan that was developed for the entire state was based on a summer day, not on a winter day. And so on a summer day, Houston uses a lot more energy than some of our cities around us, but on a cold winter day, maybe not so. And we had percentage load sheds that didn't necessarily match the use of the electricity. So you have to look at everything and take off the blinders in the way we've always done it when you start these conversations. And at the end of the day, you may still make a lot of the same decisions based on the risk profile. But you will have asked yourselves the questions in a different way. And there are some things that just from a risk profile, we would still make the same decision on the pressure sensors. I don't know. We're going through that question right now. And we may have some portable ones that we would put out for freezing weather, but these are more reliable during our normal operations. And so those are the questions we're asking ourselves. Challenge yourselves. Think about even the wacky extremes, and then go through the risk profile. Do we need to include this in our planning? Do we need to include this in our operations? And if so, why? And if not, why not? And be transparent about that.
How do you both feel about this after action process? Do you feel like, and Carol, you can go ahead and finish that thought and then jump back to Steve. Do you feel like this assessment is sort of constructive? You obviously have to figure out what happened. So there's a certain amount of kind of blame or accountability built in. And are there, it's fine to make a list of things that need to be done, but are there going to be resources, right? None of this stuff, even just pressure sensors, right? None of this stuff, or gloves, gloves for 1,000 employees isn't a huge expense, but it's an expense. So is the process of figuring out how to be more resilient in the future a fair and reasonable and constructive process in both your cases? And do you sense that in the political moment there will be resources brought to bear, or the resource battle is something else? And keep it short.
So I will say that you have to do an after action review of every incident, even if you think that you may have made some bad choices or failed in some steps along the way, because the point of an after action review is to learn and to do better next time. And it's not personal. It's not personal against any one employee in our organization. And that's an important framework to set going into it. This is about continuous improvement, and this is about identifying opportunities for success next time. And when you frame it in that forward-looking positive mindset, people can be honest and transparent about really identifying what did work, what didn't work, and making sure that we truly have a good assessment.
Okay. And will there be resources? Do you sense that there will be resources?
I am an optimist, and I believe that, and we started off before this conversation with my Steve over in San Antonio saying, hey, how did you get the rate increase that you just got voted? And part of it is the performance of the team, but part of it is clearly laying out the case for why our system fails when it does, and how underfunding it will continue to have those results.
How underfunding it, right? Okay. All right, Steve, is the after action process reasonable and constructive? And do you sense that there will be resources brought to bear for your 73 items?
So I would categorize it as very constructive. Most of our recommendations are low cost, high value returns. So those are easy. There's no excuse for not putting those in place. But on the other end of the extreme, our first report that came out said you need generators at your pumping stations. Oh, by the way, you need 63 pumping stations with generators, and we project that cost to be over $200 million. Right after that, Senate Bill 3 was approved in Texas that says, go put generators at your pumping stations. There's a couple other options you can look at, but the reality is over $200 million. Right after that, Senate Bill 3 was approved in Texas that says, go put generators at your pumping stations. There's a couple other options you can look at, but the reality is to maintain pressure in your system after 24 hours of power outage, you need a generator to be able to run the system. So by legislation now, the law says we have to put in generators at a lot of our pump stations. Prior to this event, I would have said, gosh, I don't know if we could ever justify that type of a cost for that type of a infrastructure upgrade. But now that it's a law requirement, we know we have to move in that direction. And I do believe the resources will be there, because nobody, not just me, but I think the community does not want to go through a repeat of that event. We never realized that the electrical grid had that type of a risk associated with it. And none of us want to repeat that effort ever again.
Okay. Okay. Final question. I know folks in the audience are going to have some questions, and we will make an effort to get to those. We are, in the interest of honesty, we are pre-taping this, but we'll take some questions at the end. For each of you, and I don't quite know how to ask you to answer this quickly, but Steve, I'll start with you, and Carol, you can listen and think. Each of you both thought you were ready for what might come your way, not in this weekend, but in general. Well-stocked, well-planned, well-run utilities, well-rehearsed, and you both got knocked over. Carol, you said to me, in fact, if you had showed me a movie of the week I lived through in January of this year, or a year ago January, I would have laughed and said, well, that was a good movie, but that won't happen. Everybody listening today, to our session, has responsibility that crosses into this world of climate change or water and climate change. What can you say to them? What's the wake-up call that might have gotten you guys' attention a year ago? In fact, maybe the storm is the wake-up call, but there's a don't think it can't happen to you value in the storm that you guys lived through and your colleagues in Texas lived through and worked through. What's the advice for those people who are listening and think, yeah, okay, but what should I do with this information? How do you go back to your plan and say, where's the unexpected in here that I need to get ready for? Steve, give us your best thought.
Okay, well, I would go back to that same discussion of we have all grown so accustomed to our advanced technologies and abilities to communicate, Zoom calls, cell phones, everything that we've just grown accustomed for. We take for granted all of that stuff. Electricity is driving this country, no doubt about it, day in, day out. Every one of those electrical grids out there, and of course, we're in the Texas grid. The Texas grid stands by itself. It's not connected to the rest of the US. But you have to assume that someday you wake up and there's no power. And if the grid goes down, there will be no power for several days. What are you going to do? What are your plans to at least have some sort of a roadmap laid out on what you expect employees to do, or how you would go about conducting whatever business you could have if you woke up one day and didn't have those communication devices or that ready source of energy to do all the things that we depend on? How are you going to protect your family? How are you going to protect your work environment? Those sort of things need to be laid out. Nobody wants to think about it. We all want to think that's not possible. But what the Texas storm showed us is that it is possible, and you need to have those plans ready to go.
Great. Quick question. Did the cell phone network stay operational during this event?
The cell phone networks did. Everybody ran out of power and then had to go sit in their car and run their car to get power. Gas stations were going down. Now you couldn't go get gas. So when you lose that electrical resource, everything else will cascade shortly after that.
Right. Okay. Carol, take us out. What's the lesson from this event happening, which you all never would have imagined happened to you? How do the rest of us use that?
So I will say that when you look at your utility and when you look at how you're moving forward, that you really do have to look not just even at the type of weather events that you, or even man-made events that you may endure, but you have to look at how those extremes are happening and how those extremes are changing. We are seeing significantly more intense rainfall, shorter duration, more intense, same amount of rain. We're seeing droughts between rain. We're seeing changes in how our infrastructure that was built 50 years ago is having to respond to what we're experiencing today. And then the one, and this is infrastructure related because it's the people. The one that scares me and keeps me up at night is that 50% of my workforce could leave today. And so you need to have the knowledge transfer in place such that you're bringing new people in to learn the systems such that you are ready when those people, when the next COVID comes and they're like, you know what, I'm just going to retire. Or when the next storm comes and people decide that it's time to go on to that next part of their life, that you're ready for the weather, you've been preparing for it, but that your people are ready because they've been transitioning that information, the knowledge and the skills throughout the workforce.
Wow, that's a great but sobering note to end on. You guys, I've talked to both of you for longer than we had today, and I know there's a lot more to be gained. I so appreciate you guys joining us and sharing a little taste of what this experience.
Well, welcome back live. And it's Charles and Carol.
and we're here to take some live questions. You guys got a little window into how the sausage is made. Be careful what you say when you don't think you're going to be on camera, because you might be on camera. Carol, welcome back. And I was interrupted in saying thank you then, but thanks for joining us again this morning. And folks, if you've listened, this is a woman who lived through one of the most challenging, if not the most challenging, week of her professional life, and she's still smiling, and she's just contemplating the possibility of losing half her workforce. Let's ask some questions and get some straight up answers. I'm curious. These are questions from the chat. You can throw your questions in the chat. A good question: have you changed, Carol, how you're getting weather and climate information and short-term predictions a week, 2 weeks, and if you have, how have you changed it? And has the responsibility for absorbing that information inside Houston Water changed?
So actually, about a year and a half ago, well before this storm, we hired an outside weather forecaster that we use in combination with all the local weather forecasting. Houston is one of those forecast-rich areas. We have multiple news stations, news media sources, but we also have the local federal agencies, and then we have several private that provide that as well. And so we use the private one because they're able to hone in on our infrastructure assets and their predictions, whether it's our lakes or whether it's our treatment facilities. They're actually able to hone in on smaller areas and stop and think. We're 640 square miles of land, and the Houston region is thousands of square miles, tens of thousands of square miles, and so the weather projections are pretty broad. We know, the ice storm definitely was widespread, but typically in a rain event, it's a little more isolated, except in Harvey. And so we've definitely done that specifically to give us better projections for what we might be experiencing at our facilities and the people that we directly serve. The name has totally escaped me this morning. Storm Geo is the outfit that we use for site-specific weather forecasting. And we're forecasting 2 weeks out all the time. I've already had 5 or 6 advisories in the last 2 weeks just of things going on in the tropics or things going on of potential things down the road to keep an eye out for.
Okay. It's interesting. You're being very clear. The reason to hire a commercial firm, an outside firm, is that you can say to them, not here's the zip code, but here's the 4-block area. What's going to, and that often matters with critical infrastructure. Those folks zero in on much tighter areas in terms of forecast precision.
Absolutely, and that's why we did it, so that we could get those pinpoint forecasts, and even to the point of during the storm, they'll tell us, the area that you're in has a chance of having very intense 2 to 3 inch an hour kind of rainfall this afternoon. And that tells us whether we need to have people on site ahead of time, whether we need to double up shifts. It gives us the ability to be ready to respond before we need to respond.
And just out of curiosity, I appreciate that you just contracted for it. Have you resisted hiring that? Is that relatively new capability in the last 5 years, 10 years?
Some of it is new and it improves every single day. I will say that over the last 3.5 years that I've been in this seat, we've continued to improve how we respond to emergencies. We actually have a team, it's a small team, it's only 4 or 5 people, that their full-time job is emergency preparedness year-round. And they recommended that we do that, and there was no resistance to doing it when they recommended it. It's very good return for the investment, but we had done emergency response as part-time jobs of everybody's job, as opposed to having a few people who are focusing on it in an integrated method throughout the year.
Right. It is exactly the kind of thing that pays itself back with a couple of good, important forecasts that help you plan. Another question from the audience. Has this event changed your relationship with your nearby water utilities? Are you doing something differently in terms of emergency planning with them?
So from the water side, we provide water to a large portion of the region. And so we had already done a lot of planning with them. We are the primary raw water supplier for the region, and we are the largest treated water supplier. We have 2.3 million people within the city of Houston, but we actually provide treated water to nearly 5 million people in the greater Houston area. So we already had a very integrated planning and very positive relationships, just because we had existing relationships even going into this storm. But as we said in the pre-recorded portion, if you don't do your after action and ask yourselves those questions, are there some people that may not be in the group right now that we need to extend a handout and invite them into the table to be part of this discussion? Absolutely. We'll ask those questions every time.
Okay. Did you game out these kind of responses in advance before this event? In other words, I think you told me 4 times a year your emergency generators didn't work the way you wanted, but in fact, 4 times a year you turn them all on and run the system for a day on those generators to make sure they work when you turn them on, right? No point in having a flashlight if you don't know if the batteries work till the moment you need it. Had you gamed out any of these responses even in tabletop sort of, I guess the phrase is war games? And are you going to do more of that given what happened and how you all responded? Is that a valuable thing to do?
Absolutely a valuable thing to do. We had done multiple hurricane tabletop exercises. 2 years ago, our mass disaster exercise was actually a major downtown high-rise fire, and how not only would we respond to it through firefighting, but how would we respond to it through the water system and all the things that are related to that. So we're always looking for realistic major impact scenarios. This was not one that had been on our list. I suspect that this is one that's going to be in the rotation at least once every 5 to 10 years now moving forward on our tabletop exercises, if not more often than that. I still think hurricanes is our largest, hurricanes, tropical storms, and just rain is our largest risk just from probability of occurrence. But I think that we will continue to have things added, and freezing will definitely be one that we look at more in the future.
And just for people who don't do these kind of tabletop exercises, give us the 60-second version. Who plans them for you? Do you actually contract with for instance, a training group that does this all the time so they feel realistic and they're well done? And what's the value? Why is it valuable?
So the tabletop exercises are probably they're like a dress rehearsal. And we have, when I say that Public Works didn't have emergency management full-time, the city does have an Office of Emergency Management that is full-time, and we've had that for a long time, but it just wasn't inside Public Works or inside our utility. And so these tabletop exercises, our Office of Emergency Management spearheads them. They use outside consultants sometimes we do it internally. And you literally, we come to the Emergency Operations Center and we spend the day exactly acting out as if it were happening at the time. Like they literally will be bringing in, here's the newscast, here's the current weather forecast. We just got a phone call from this neighborhood and we've got water in people's homes. We've got rioters that are taking over a gas station, or whatever it is that's happening, and they will come in and literally drop the scenario into the day. and you respond. Well, and you literally respond the way that you would respond by actually directing staff to take the measures that they would need to take. It is as real without the emotion and the hype. It's as realistic a scenario as you can have going through the event over the course of the day, with purposeful curveballs thrown at you so that it makes you think and not just check the boxes and follow along.
Right. And that it's a little bit of muscle memory. What that means is that when these events inevitably occur, you've got some experience having thought about it and reacted, and also having assessed whether the practice, the rehearsal reaction was the right one. You mentioned, I'm going to let this be the last question unless somebody jumps in with another one. You mentioned the incredible need and value of institutional knowledge because all kinds of things are happening in the world in terms of employment. This is the kind of event. This is the kind of event that might make people think I could join those folks. That could be important, exciting work. It's also the kind of event that could cause people to think, I think I'm going to retire now. I've had enough of this. What kind of system are you using to archive that institutional knowledge? Are you just having, Sam sit down with Susan and say, okay, Susan, let me tell you what I know? How are you creating a system to understand what people know and pass it on?
Well, so I'm going to put in a little bit of plug for the American Public Works Association with this, because one of the things that we as an organization have chosen to do is to be an American Public Works Association accredited public works organization. And part of that process is exactly what you talk about, documenting exactly how you do your job every single day and comparing yourself to what is industry standard and where you meet or exceed that. And so we're actually we were accredited and we've been through 2 reaccreditations and we're getting ready to go through our third. Well, actually, I'm sorry, we've been through a reaccreditation. We're getting ready to go through our second reaccreditation, so our third review. And part of that process is the first time you're just trying to say, hey, do we have this written down anywhere? The second time you go through it, you're saying, does this actually reflect what we do? And the third time that you go through it, you're actually taking the opportunity to make sure that your training, your standard operating procedures, your lessons learned, that everything that a new employee could show up and you could say, here's the book, here's how we do our job. Let me show you, but also you can read it for yourself. And so since we were in the process of doing that third one, it has actually been delayed for 6 months because of COVID, but we're actually scrubbing back through that right now to make sure that this cold weather portion is in our standard operating procedures and approaches and processes. And it's documented in a way that will outlive any single employee because it's all the way down to pretty much every job, every classification, how we do things.
And that's one of those events, the accreditation and review process, that people roll their eyes at. But you wouldn't do this level of benchmarking and documentation without somebody looking over your shoulder, I assume. And it's the kind of process that sort of makes you do something you should do, and then you're glad you did it.
Absolutely. And quite often when we're writing it down, in the process of looking at the process, we figure out that the process we've been doing for the last 35 years is the process that we developed before there were computers, before there were cell phones, and that we're taking 17 extra steps.
Right.
And we can actually become significantly more efficient, better cross-trained, more redundant, just by taking the time to look at our processes.
I appreciate that, Carol, and I so appreciate you joining us last week for an hour and this week and for preparing. And I think people got a lot out of this. The big value of your experience is the ability to share it and help other people get ready. So thank you so much. And I'm going to toss it back to Dean.
Thanks very much, Charles and Carol. Wow, and Steve, of course. Really harrowing. I don't know how Carol actually was able to get 6 hours of sleep, but makes a lot of sense. Great perspective to really get an understanding of what was taking place and things that we would have never imagined. The chlorine situation, as an example, or the clothing requirements of the crews in Houston as well. So very informative. Thank you very much. As we close out the day, I want to show to you one of our success videos that we have been busily working with our partner Source 10. And this one's for today is called Advancing Innovation. We are producing 6 videos. You will soon see all of them on our website. And this is number 2. So please run Advancing Innovation.
Water is what makes it all work. If you take that away, nothing happens. Everything from inside of your cells to everything outside your cells. So the Water Council Tech Challenge is an opportunity for technologies and organizations to present to established companies in the water space, Badger Meter plus others. And Badger Meter has a team, a multidisciplinary team, where we come to the table and bring in the resources we need to evaluate and advise on these technology presentations.
We do it because we don't know what we don't know. We don't know who's out there that maybe has that key technology that will drive us forward. The Tech Challenge really gives us the opportunity to find these new innovative technologies at the ground level, right when they're coming up and starting to form companies and become available in the marketplace.
The Water Council has large reach across the globe. We've met with companies from Israel, Australia, Africa. We've met with universities on the east and west coast of the United States. They really kind of do have octopus arms out into all the spaces.
One of the best things for us about the Tech Challenge is the Water Council's ability to reach out to that global audience and really find some of those innovators that wouldn't be on our radar because they're not in our regions.
The Water Council Tech Challenge is really open to all participants, and it really helps give some advantage to the little guy because we've met with single engineers, working by themselves. We've met with some larger companies, but they all get an equal seat at the table, and they get to spend time with some companies with expertise in the water space. I don't think organizations have the time, the resources, or the reach to do this on their own. They just don't have the time to make it work. So the Water Council working in the background, bringing these opportunities to the table certainly helps.
But I would tell anybody who's thinking about applying to a Tech Challenge to do it. The opportunities to discuss your technologies with the engineering leadership and the technology leadership at these companies is phenomenal. We have great interactions with all of the companies involved in Tech Challenge and with all the participants. And we really enjoy the interaction, and I think we all get a lot out of it as well, learning from each other about the markets and the technologies at the same time.
We shine a light on emerging innovations. Join our hub, where water works.
Once again, I want to express my appreciation to Source 10 Video for the production of that piece. And I'm also very pleased to say that joining A.O. Smith and Badger Meter earlier this year, we had Watts Water. And recently, we also announced that Xylem is joining the cohort of companies as part of the Tech Challenge. We will be announcing the next challenge this coming fall. The 4 companies actually met together earlier this week and starting to put together the topics for that challenge. As we close out the day, I want to show and close out with one of our last brew presentation for today, and that is Bloom Optics.
Hello, my name is Dr. Igor Merjan, and I'm pleased to present to you Bloom Optics, a startup launched in 2020 aimed at tackling various issues surrounding harmful algal blooms. Harmful algal blooms, or HABs, are extreme growths of algae or cyanobacteria. They can overwhelm ecosystems and notably produce toxins dangerous to humans and animals. Because of this, issues such as pet poisonings, shellfish contamination, beach closures, and the need to heavily invest in advanced water treatment are common in affected areas. Speaking of affected areas, harmful algal blooms have been detected in nearly every country on Earth, including 62% of U.S. counties. Most notably, the Great Lakes and coastal areas are frequent sites of appearance. Because of the magnitude of the HAB problem, current solutions for study and monitoring have heavily relied on satellite imaging, citizen scientists, volunteers, and sparsely distributed water quality monitoring buoys. However, this approach is often ineffective in properly tackling the HAB issue, resulting in slow data turnaround, data gaps below cloud cover and in nearshore areas where exposures are most likely to occur, as well as an over-reliance on volunteers and buoys which only provide data in a very limited radius. Therefore, the goal of Bloom Optics is to elevate the current standards of HAB monitoring by incorporating advancing drone, sensor, and water quality analysis technologies, giving our clients access to robust data sets, empowering their decision-making, and providing cost savings by eliminating inefficiency. We do this by analyzing historical data and established data sources to identify high-risk areas and gaps in the surveillance system. Then, we fill those gaps by utilizing drone remote sensing and water sample collection, as well as ROV water quality analysis to build robust data sets with high-resolution HAB monitoring capabilities with more applications than satellites alone. We leverage this method to produce personalized packages to our clients and are working to develop data licensing and subscription services as well. By applying Bloom Optics to areas such as the Finger Lakes in New York State, we can greatly curb the number of unnecessary beach closures by efficiently and dynamically opening and closing beaches as the HAB threat subsides. This approach can greatly curb lost revenues associated with more than 1,000 lost beach days every year in New York State alone. If you apply it to a water treatment intake, Bloom Optics can empower water plant operators with greater knowledge of when to activate and deactivate expensive advanced water treatment systems, therefore producing cost savings in operation and increasing efficiency. Due to the interdisciplinary nature of the problem, the Bloom Optics team is made up of experts in environmental health sciences, business and innovation, environmental sustainability, and remote systems. Together, we have nearly 40 years of experience as professional consultants and researchers. Today, we continue to work closely with our parent company, Ramble, to innovate and advance Bloom Optics. As I mentioned previously, Bloom Optics was launched in 2020 after an intensive period of client validation, field testing, and continuous collaboration and innovation. We use these experiences to raise $230,000 in startup funding, meaning that today we're working to diversify our offerings and services, optimize our product delivery, and find new strategic collaborators. Therefore, we're currently looking for customers and partners interested in Bloom Optics services or pilot projects, as well as collaborators wanting to join our rapidly expanding collaborative ecosystem and helping us grow as a company. With that, I would like to thank you and invite you all to reach out to us or visit our website at bloomoptics.com.
Thank you very much, Igor, for that presentation, and we want to wish you two a best of luck, going forward in the future. So, thank you everyone for joining us today for day 5 of the 2021 Water Leaders Summit. We will finish the full summit tomorrow on Thursday with a topic of healthy buildings, healthy people. You may have seen on television more recently a lot of ads about well buildings. You'll get to hear a lot more about what that all means during that session tomorrow. So until tomorrow, thank you again for joining us, and look forward to speaking to you then. Good night.